This is chapter 4, verse 157. And for their saying, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. And they killed him not, nor did they cause his death on the cross. But he was made to appear to them as such. And certainly those who differ therein are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge about it, but only follow a conjecture. And they killed him not for certain. This is Easter, and Easter celebrations, as some of you would know, start 40 days before Good Friday, when it is said that Jesus Christ was put on the cross, and some believe that he died on the cross. The period preceding Easter is called Lent, when our Christian friends fast, but they don't observe a complete fast. What they do is they make a resolution to give up something. Some of them give up drinking, some of them give up eating meat, some of them give up eating chocolate, etc. Whatever it is that they think they have used in excess, they give that up for Lent. And then of course we have Good Friday and the 3 days to Easter Monday, when it is said that Jesus rose from the dead, and then he went up to heavens and he sits on the right hand of God. I don't suppose he actually sits on the right hand of God, otherwise God might find it difficult to move his right hand, but there we are. Easter itself actually is not a very new celebration or a custom. For thousands of years, people had been celebrating that because it's the beginning of spring. The world, particularly in Europe, has come through a long period of darkness and coldness, where all vegetation died. And with the coming of the spring, then we get the signs of life reappearing. Some people say that Easter is actually a derivation of the word Estor, which means spring. Other people say that Easter comes from Estore, which was the name of a goddess amongst the Anglo-Saxon people. So there are different interpretations of how the word Easter comes, but there are interesting things. For example, if you do research, you will find that Easter eggs, or certainly decorated eggs, existed 60,000 years ago. These have been found, ostrich eggs have been found in Africa, which have been decorated in some way. Again, in Sumerian and Egyptian tombs, which are 5,000 years old or more, similar eggs have been found. These are not ostrich eggs, but these eggs are made of gold and they are made of silver. But again, they are decorated. So there is this link between celebration of a religious festival and the sort of eggs we see. In the days of old, and this never occurs to people, real eggs used to be used, because of course chocolate didn't come to England until just after the First World War. So you didn't have chocolate eggs. So they used real eggs. And it's interesting that The custom of using eggs in England started because lots of people gave up eggs for Lent because of high cholesterol and all that kind of thing. And the result was that after 40 days, you had lots and lots and lots of eggs and you didn't know what to do with them. And as there were no freezers and fridges and things in those days, you couldn't freeze them and keep them for next month or next year or whatever, so you had to eat them. So this custom developed not to waste food. You hard boiled them and you decorated them and you used them for Easter. So in social terms, it's not strictly speaking a religious festival or commemoration. It goes back many, well, I was going to say centuries, it goes back many millennia. From the time that people came up with this idea that spring represented the victory of good or life over death. And this is why it's linked to death of Jesus, as Christians believe, because Christians say that Jesus died for our sins. He was put in the sepulchre or a cave or a grave, and then after 3 days, having spent those 3 days in hell, paying for our sins, Jesus came back to life, and then he rose to heavens, and now he sits with God. Now what I want to do is, I want to look at what the New Testament has to say about this, and whether there is actually a rational explanation for the events exactly as they are described. Matthew, for example, says, this is chapter 27, now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. Now, so this means, I haven't read the preceding bit, which means that Jesus has already been put on the cross, and after he is put on the cross, there is darkness. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then some of them who stood there. So we know that up until that time, Jesus was alive. And it is said that it was after that that Jesus gave up the ghost, as it's called, or his soul, and he died. But then if we carry on and we look at, you see, the interesting thing is, if we look at all the testaments, there are different bits and pieces to be found in each testament. For example, if you look at Mark, now Matthew doesn't mention that there was anyone, well, Matthew mentions the fact that when Jesus cried out, then people who were there, the Jews were there to try and see that he is going to die, and they said he is still alive. So they took a sponge, they saturated that with vinegar, and then they gave Jesus that to drink, to cause him even more pain than he was already in. But Mark tells us something slightly different. And Jesus cried with a loud voice and gave up the spirit. And the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw, and when the centurion who stood facing him saw that he too cried out and gave up the spirit, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. So there was a soldier, centurion, a Roman soldier, who was present, and he saw Jesus cry out, and he said, he is now dead. He was indeed the Son of Man, the Son of God. Now, interestingly, then what happens is, then Mark tells us Joseph, an honorable counselor who also waited for the kingdom of God, came and went boldly unto Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. This is interesting because I think Luke tells us that Joseph, this is not Jesus' father, this is another Joseph of Arimathea. I think it is Luke who tells us that Joseph was afraid of dying, and he'd hidden the fact from his people, that is the Jews, that he followed Jesus. But here Mark tells us that Joseph went in boldly unto Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. And Pilate marveled if he were already dead. And calling unto him the centurion, he asked him whether he had been any while dead. And when he knew it from the centurion, he gave the body to Joseph. So what this tells us, that Pilate was surprised that Jesus was actually dead. Because remember, I mean, being on the cross is a painful thing, I'm sure. I'm not talking from experience, but if people drive nails into your hands and feet and put you on cross, it can't be a pleasant experience. But people in Philippines and so on replicate that even now. They actually have nails driven into their wrists. In Europe, they say that it was in his palms, but it couldn't have been his palms, because when he was put on the cross, they would have been torn with the weight of his body. There is not enough there. But if the nail was driven through his wrist, then obviously there is that bone to support the weight. But anyway, be that as it may. Now, what we find is Pilate is surprised that Jesus is already dead. Because as I said, although it's not a pleasant experience, he was a young man. He had been on the cross for only 3 hours. And if we read on in another place, we find that what happened was that the centurion, when he went and saw, the centurion saw that the two thieves who were also crucified with Jesus, the one on the right, he checks and he finds that thief is alive. So he breaks that thief's legs, because darkness is now falling and Sabbath is starting, and you could not leave anyone hanging on the cross on the Sabbath day. So either they died, or you killed them, or you took them down. So because they were to be killed, and it says that he checked the one to the right and he was still alive, so he broke his legs. And he went to the left and he was still alive and he broke his legs. And then he looked at Jesus and Jesus was still alive. So it says here, this is in John, but when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was dead already, and they brought not his legs. So in one place we have one centurion, here it says they, so there was more than one centurion. But anyway, so they saw him dead. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and immediately came there out blood and water. And he saw, and he that saw it bore witness, and his witness is true, and so it goes on. Now, have you heard of gravity? Yes? If you hang someone, blood circulates through your body. Why? Because your heart pumps it through the body. There is a pump here that pumps the heart through the body. If you are dead, what happens to the heart? It stops pumping. So, if the heart stops pumping, there is no pump there to circulate the blood around the body, and you are hanging and there is gravity. What will happen to blood? All the blood and water in the body will sink to your feet and to your legs. But this tells us, but one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side. So, the soldier pierced him here, and immediately shows that the blood was actually circulating through the body. So, immediately came there out blood and water, and he saw it. Now, this is why Pilate is astonished, as I read out to you, that Pilate was amazed that Jesus was already dead. Well, we put 3 people on the cross, and the youngest of them is dead, but the other 2 are still alive, and we have to break their legs to kill them. What happens next? And after this, I will carry on with John, although it is mentioned in the other place as well. And after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of Jews, this is what I was saying. In the other place it says he was a bold person, boldly went in. But secretly for fear of Jews, besought Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. And he came therefore and took the body of Jesus. And then also came Nicodemus and so on. They took the body of Jesus, wound it in linen. In English, what would that be? They bandaged it, because he had been injured and hurt. They bandaged his body, and with spices, as manner of the Jews and so on. And then they covered his body with spices. What did they do? In modern terminology, they put an ointment on his wounds. Now, what do you do when you get cut? Yes, if it's a bad cut, you put some ointment on it to disinfect it, and you put elastoplast or something on it. Well, exactly the same thing happened. Now, let us look at the evidence so far. A young man is put on the cross, he is up there for 3 hours. The others put on the cross are still alive when it is time to take them down, but he is found to be dead. A soldier pierces his side up here, and blood and water flow out, and immediately his follower, a disciple, goes to Pilate and says, "Can I have the body, please?" And Pilate asks the centurion, "Is he dead?" And the centurion says yes, and Pilate is astonished. How come? He has already died. This shows that there is a greater possibility that Jesus was actually alive when he was taken down from the cross. He is obviously in a state of shock, because they have arrested him, they have taken him to trial. We know he is in a state of shock, because when Pilate says to him, Pilate does not want to put Jesus on the cross. So he asks Jesus to defend himself, and Jesus can't. He is in a state of shock because he is being beaten, etc. And then of course he has to carry this cross, and he is whipped and lashed, and he has this crown of thorns on his body, with people jeering, etc. So he has gone into a coma, and God put him in that coma to save him from dying on the cross. One reason for that was that Jesus came to all the tribes of Israel, and at the time that he appeared, not all of them lived in Palestine. They had migrated. They had gone to places like Afghanistan, they had gone to places like Kashmir in India. And if you look at those people, they bear a close resemblance to the physical characteristics of the Jews. So, Jesus is then taken down and he is put in this sepulchre or this cave where he rests in a cool atmosphere for 3 days. And then further, Bible then tells us that after 3 days, when Mary Magdalene and Mary his mother, I don't know why they didn't have different names, it's so confusing. Joseph his father, Joseph Arimathea, Mary Magdalene, Mary his mother. Well, what was it? Were they short of names or what? It must have been a shortage of names, certainly first names. Anyway, Mary Magdalene and Mary his mother, they went to look for him, and they went to the cave, and they were wondering how they were going to move that stone. So that shows us another thing, that his disciples and his family knew where he had been buried. And once Sabbath etc. was over, once they had overcome their shock, I even believe that perhaps they knew he was still alive. This is why they didn't make any attempt to approach that cave for 3 days, because they wanted things to subside. And when they get there, they find that the stone has been moved. Well, the Bible tells us that angels had moved the stone. Well, I put it to you that Jesus recovered after 3 days of rest and recuperation and treatment, and then he pushed the stone aside and he came out. Now, the fact that he was alive was shown by the fact that even his mother didn't recognize him. And he had to say to her, "Look, I'm your son, I'm Jesus," which shows that he was disguised as a gardener. Why would he need to disguise himself if he had conquered death and, having died once, come back to life again? There would be no need. And in fact, it would have been best for him to march into Jerusalem and say, "You killed me, look, I've come back from the dead, now do you believe that I'm the Son of God or Prophet of God?" That would have been a whole lot more convincing argument for his being the Son of God, that they tried to kill him and they couldn't. But why wouldn't he take that risk? The only reason he wouldn't take that risk is that he hadn't actually died, he was in a coma and he recovered, and he knew that if he went into Jerusalem again, the Sanhedrin, etc., and the other Jewish temple authorities, this time they will make sure that they cut his head off rather than just put him on the cross, make sure he is dead. And if we carry on, here it says, he says to I think either Mary Magdalene or his mother, here we are, it's in Luke, because I'm flicking between different books. "And while they yet believed not for joy and wondered, he said unto them, Have ye here anything to eat? And they gave him a piece of a broiled fish and a honeycomb, and he took it and did eat before them." Now, why would a resurrected... Now, let me ask this question. Jesus died on the cross, was put in hell for 3 days, came back to life. So, let's assume he didn't get anything to eat for 3 days in hell, and he's come back to life and he's very hungry. This is why he's saying, I am hungry, and they give him this fish and this honeycomb. But so that means he needs to eat, because he asked for food and they gave him food. And Bible tells us they saw him eating. Now ask yourself this: once he's gone up to the heavens, where he's been sitting for 2,500 years, who is feeding him? Because according to Bible, we are told he needs to eat. Even after coming back to life, after death, he needs to eat, because he says here, I am hungry, give me food. And women give him food. They give him fish and they give him a honeycomb. Now I know, I told you that when I was halfway up the Himalayas, we went round a corner, and what did we see? We saw a McDonald's. There was nothing else there, but there was a McDonald's. I know halfway up the Himalayas is very high, but I don't think that even McDonald's have made it to heavens yet. Well, certainly not at the time of Jesus. So what's he been eating? If he needs to eat and he hasn't eaten anything for 2,500 years, well, surely he must have passed away up in heaven. The point and the other point that I made, why didn't he go into Jerusalem? Why did he disappear from Palestine with his mother? The point I'm trying to make to you is this: apart from the fact that the whole story is not in any one of the books of New Testaments. As I read out to you, there are bits in Matthew, there are bits in Luke that I read out, there are bits in John that I read out. But what I'm saying to you is, if you put them all together and write it as one narrative, a rational explanation is the one that I gave you. Jesus was in a state of shock because what had been happening to him. He was put on the cross, he went into a coma. The fact that he was alive is shown by the fact that the two thieves who were put on the cross next to him, they were still alive and they were older than he was. Jesus was a younger man, he was on the cross for only 3 hours. It's a painful experience, a horrible experience, but not necessarily a fatal one. When the centurion pierces his side, blood flows out from up here. So his heart is still pumping. So he is still alive. He is given into the care of a disciple who bandages him and puts ointments on him. And in fact, shortly, I forgot to look for this reference, shortly after Joseph takes the body away, Jews go to Pilate and they demand Jesus' body. And Pilate says, why? They said, we want his body, because they are astonished that Jesus has already died and was taken down from the cross without his legs being broken. They said, we want his body, lest the evil to come is greater than the evil that has gone before. So Pilate is amazed that Jesus has passed on. Jews are amazed that he is passed on. So we are talking about the evidence of people who were there. And then, as I said, he recovers, he disguises himself as a gardener, and he disguises himself so well that even his mother can't recognize him. And then he goes out, meets his disciples. As the Bible shows us, he has food with his mother and other people. And in fact, there is another reference in there where one of the disciples, perhaps it's Peter, when he sees him, he is so happy that he goes and embraces Jesus. Then Jesus says, don't embrace me so hard, because I've been pierced on the side and I can feel pain. Why would and you see, this is what I find puzzling. Jesus rises from the dead, he overcomes death, but his wounds are not cured. There are still wounds in his arms or hands, and in his feet and on his side, because he says, don't embrace me so hard, it's painful because I have this wound. If you can overcome death, it might be a nice idea to cure your wounds at the same time, so you're not in pain as well, or pain either. So I think there's a perfectly rational explanation you can put on the events exactly as described in the New Testaments. That he comes out, he is hungry, he hasn't eaten anything for 3 days, this is why he asks for food. He eats, he gives his disciples instructions about the propagation of Christianity, and then he disappears, and all of this is done in complete secret and secrecy, so that people don't find out that he is still alive. And this is why the Holy Quran, the verse that I read out to you, says that they don't know what happened to him, they're in doubt. And unfortunately, the Muslim story of what happened to him, and that was that Judas was made to look like Jesus, and he's the one who was put on cross. Because when you say he was bodily taken up before he was put on the cross, you have to explain who the third person was. But then question then arises, if I'm made to look like Hamad and they're putting me on the cross, I'm not quietly going to go and just go up on the cross. I'm going to say, he's sitting over there. Go and grab him. Don't put me on the cross. And Judas doesn't say anything. He says, oh fine, okay, put me on the cross. And this is a rational explanation that tallies with what is in the Holy Quran, and that explains the things as they are described in all of the Testaments.